If you get your Bibles with you, would you open up to Exodus chapter 13? We're going to finish chapter 13 and chapter 14 this morning. It's rainy and cold outside. What else you got to do? There's few things in life as frustrating as expectations. It's an interesting thing. Like if we could all just sit and talk and share story after story after story, that we'd all have hundreds of them where we expected something to go one way and it just didn't. Where I think we might run out of stories is if we decided to share stories of when we expected something to go one way and it went exactly that way. Like that just rarely, if ever, happens. And it causes us to deal with an uncomfortable and unfortunate truth. We don't know as much as we would like to, and we don't know as much as we think we do. We don't really see or understand ourselves and or reality the way that we think we do, or certainly the way that we would like to. And so we're constantly in this tension of life where we have these ideas, these hopes, these expectations of how things can go or how things should go, and we try to convince ourselves that these are how things will go, and then time after time after time we have to deal with broken expectations. When our expectations meet reality, what do? We've been walking through this book of Exodus, and God's people have found themselves in desperate and dire circumstances, enslaved in a foreign land by a foreign people and foreign gods, victimized, brutalized, subject to radical genocide. And yet God was with them, and so they cried out, and God has heard their cries and raised up Moses and Aaron, and God has battled on their behalf with Pharaoh. And so for this several chapters, we've seen God with sign after sign, plague after plague. Literally, the Hebrew word, blow, strike after strike after strike. God has been battling for his people to simultaneously bring them freedom and redemption, all while he is bringing judgment and justice upon the Egyptians. And so God finally humbles Pharaoh and Egypt and the gods of Egypt to the point where they expel the Israelites from their midst. They don't just let them go, they kick them out. They don't just allow it to happen, they pay them to do it. And so last week we saw the journey begin as God consecrated his people unto himself and leads them on those first few steps out of Egypt. And I just wonder, I spent a lot of time wondering, like, what was going on in the hearts and the minds of these ancient Israelites, these ancient followers of Yahweh, of God, as they've watched God battle on their behalf, as they've witnessed miracle after miracle after miracle, and then in an instant, it seems, and suddenly, after a night of terror, they begin this radical journey out into the unknown, out to the land of promise. But to get to the land of promise, they've got to walk through the wilderness of chaos. And I wonder what their expectations were. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the vast majority of them believed that the hard part was over. I mean, that would seem natural. I mean, they've been crying out for deliverance. They've been crying out for God to rescue them because the problem was the Egyptians. And now God has dealt with the Egyptians. So wouldn't it be nice to hope and to believe that from here on out it's smooth sailing? From here on out, the problem's been dealt with. Things rarely turn out the way we expect them to. The text begins. It says, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the land of Philistines, although that was near. So right from the beginning of our passage this morning, we come across this uncomfortable but brutal reality in the Word that we see over and over and over again, is that God rarely, if ever, takes the easy and short path. So we don't know, and I'm not going to get into the details of geography and the guesses of where this city is and where this is. We know in general where Egypt was. We know in general where Canaan was. We know in general the direction they had to go was east, and we know that. But this is a long time ago, and archaeology is a very beautiful but incomplete science, right? So there's much more that we don't know than what we do know. So the details don't really matter. But what we do know is that there would have been a straight shot. But it would have led them through a land that was occupied by a people that are going to plague them for generations to come, the Philistines. And so when Pharaoh let them go, God does not lead them the short way. He doesn't take them the easy way. Because God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So God knows that, yes, Pharaoh and the Egyptians were a problem. But God also knows that the Hebrews and Israelites themselves are a problem. We often like to convince ourselves that the greatest enemies to our lives are external. But what I've found, and what I think the Scripture points out over and over and over again, is that, like, I am my own greatest enemy on a very regular and consistent basis. So here are these Israelites who have just been dramatically, miraculously, supernaturally rescued and freed and redeemed by God, and yet God knows if they hit trouble too quick, they're going to turn around and want to go back to Egypt. So I'm not going to take them that way. They're not ready for that. They're not ready for that. For God led the people around by the way of the wilderness towards the Red Sea, towards the Sea of Reeds. The Red Sea could also be translated, and is in one other place in the Torah, as the Sea of Ends. It's in geographic and cosmological understanding. Egypt saw themselves as the divine land, the favored land, the land that is at the center of the universe. Of course it has to be. The very incarnation of God has dwelled in their midst as Pharaoh. And so there's this idea of the borders of the land are where order. In Hebrew, we'd call it shalom, and in Egyptian, they'd call it ma'at. In the land of Egypt, the land of the sun, the land of light, that's the land of the gods, and it's the land that is blessed. And the edges of it, the borders of it, outside of it lies chaos. Outside of it lies the wilderness. And so God is leading them out of the land of slavery, the land of Egypt, and he takes them up to the edge, to the border, and it's bordered by this Sea of Reeds, this Red Sea, this And of course, water and the sea is always, in the biblical context, a sign of a symbol of chaos and that which needs to be brought into order, that which is set opposed to God. So here God is leading his people, doesn't take them the easy way, begins to lead them out into the wilderness, this empty, void, chaotic place. And where does he take them? He takes them to the sea. I want you to hold on to this imagery. It says, and the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt, equipped for battle. Some of the English translations say equipped for battle. Some of your English translations may say in groups of 50 or in 5 different groups. It's a Hebrew word that means 5 or 50 multiples of 5 or preparedness. And so maybe when the Egyptians were giving them their gold and their silver, and they would have taken some swords. Maybe they would have taken some bows, some weapons of warfare, but they wouldn't know how to use them. So think about this. God has called them out to be his hosts, that they are now to be the army of the Lord, but all they've ever been are slaves. Not one of them has been trained in the arts of war. Not one of them is familiar with the instruments of war. So they go out equipped for war, but absolutely unprepared for it. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. You're like, where did that come from? Like out of the blue. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. It takes us back into Genesis. It takes us back to how this whole scenario was set up and unfolded, that God had originally led his people into Egypt to protect them. God had originally brought them into Egypt to provide for them in the time of great famine. God had prepared a place for them, and when they first came, they were welcomed because God had sent Joseph in advance. Not in a way that Joseph would have planned, but God had created this environment where they were there, but through it all, see, when Jacob and his sons get to Egypt, they know that it's not going to be permanent. They know that it's temporary because God has been really clear with them about that. And so on his deathbed, this is the end of Genesis, last chapter, Genesis chapter 50, Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. He made them swear, he made them promise, based in the hope, in the expectation that God was going to be faithful and true to his word. And just like God had been faithful to protect them and provide for them by bringing them to Egypt, God was going to be faithful to show up and bring them out of Egypt. He says, when I go, take my bones with you. I don't want to be buried here in the land of slavery. I don't want to be, take me to the land of promise. Take me with you. And so they do. And so it says they moved on from Succoth and encamped at Etham and on the edge of the wilderness, on the edge of the wilderness, on the edge of the known and the unknown. The boundary between order and chaos, life and death. They come to the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord and Yahweh went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they might travel by day and by night. Which, in that time period, nearly impossible to travel at night. There's no flashlights, there's no GPS systems, there's no radar and maps, there's no quick and easy directions. Like, you want to get lost, try to travel at night. Yeah, you can try to use the stars, but they're not always, if you got clouds, if you got whatever. So God shows up. And this is another one of these theophanies, an appearance of God, a visible, physical manifestation of God in real space-time history. God shows up, and he's surrounded in this cloud, this pillar, there's symbolic imageries, like trying to describe what this is, but there's this manifestation of God right in their midst, and it goes before them so that they don't have to guess which way they're supposed to go. They just follow it. And so at day, there's this great cloud that maybe provides some relief from the sun and the heat, and then at nighttime, it's this fire that leads them and lights the way for them. God doesn't take them on the short way. God doesn't take them the easy way, but God goes with them. He's with them, and that's what it's all been about. It's all been about God absolutely committed to His original design to dwell in the midst of His people, for heaven and earth to meet. These theophanies, these appearances of God, they are right now in the broken world that we inhabit unusual. They seem to be aberrations. They're occasional. We can't predict them or dictate them. But in God's design, it's supposed to be normal. Normal in the heart and mind of God is heaven and earth to be together. Normal in the heart and mind in the kingdom of God is God in the midst of His people. And so here He is. He has redeemed for Himself His people, and now He's leading them by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. He was with them. He's with them. There's so much imagery in this text that connects us to the story of creation. Land and sea, wilderness and chaos, light and dark, the presence of God in the midst of it. These are not unintended. These are completely intended images that are being wrapped in and drawn into this narrative so that we understand what is taking place and what God is about to do as an act of God and by God of new creation. So the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of this place that's between this place and the sea, in front of that other place. And you shall encamp facing it by the sea." So this is interesting. So, and again, we don't know exactly where these places are, but God has led them now to the place, the border of the kingdom, the sea at the end, the Red Sea, they're there. And then God takes them and backs them into a corner. So from a military point of view, God's a terrible general, right? Terrible. Like, this is not what you do. He's just put them in a position where they can be easily overtaken and defeated. God has backed them into a corner. And God does it intentionally, purposely. He's the one that leads them there. Then He directly communicates to Moses, all right, we're going to go, and I want you to go over here now, and you're going to encamp. And that word encamp, it comes from the Hebrew word that means like an oval or an ellipsis. So it describes the way and the shape of their encampment, with God in their midst, and they're surrounded, and they've got the sea behind them, and they're looking back towards Egypt, and God says, stop here. For Pharaoh will say of the people of Israel, they're wandering in the land, and the wilderness has shut them in. So God's doing this on purpose, so that Pharaoh's going to hear reports, and Pharaoh's going to have his spies and his informants, and they're going to be keeping an eye on this people group that is leaving, and he's going to hear about how they don't take the short route, they don't take the easy route, they start wandering around, and then all of a sudden they end up backed up into this corner. And God does that on purpose, so that Pharaoh will go, oh, they don't know what they're doing. And then I will strengthen Pharaoh's heart, God says, and he will pursue them. Strengthen. This idea of hardening Pharaoh's heart, I've talked to you about how that verb means to strengthen. What it literally means is to make unchanging in will, opinion, or desire. So it's not that God is making Pharaoh decide to do something that he doesn't want to do. God is strengthening Pharaoh to hold on to what he really wants to do. And so Pharaoh has been humiliated and humbled and beaten, and he cried uncle, and he gave up, and he kicked them out. But now he's watching them go, and it's no surprise to anyone that observes human nature and anyone that sees people obsessed with power. It's no surprise that Pharaoh is going to, like a man waking up from a dream, go, what did I just do? What did I just do? Why did I let them go? And look at, they don't know where they're going. They can't protect themselves. So I will strengthen Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host. God is setting this up so that he can achieve his ultimate judgment, and it is a just judgment upon Pharaoh and his armies. Receive glory. It says, and then the Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh. And they did so. They camped just like he said. So when the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of Pharaoh and his servants was changed towards the people. And they said, what is this we have done? We've let Israel go from serving us. We can't allow this. We had really good free slave labor. We got to get them back. So he made ready his chariot. He made ready his chariot. I mean, in the ancient world, the chariot was the ultimate weapon of war. And Pharaoh's chariots were known. I mean, Pharaoh was the dominant military power in the world at the time. So Pharaoh gets his chariot, and he takes his army with him. He takes 600 chosen chariots. 600 chosen chariots. And all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. So he puts together a mighty, mighty military force. The Israelites are walking. The Israelites have their families. The Israelites have their herds. The Israelites are moving slowly, and now they've backed themselves up against the sea at the end of the world. And so Pharaoh takes his fast, powerful army and sets out in pursuit. And the Lord strengthened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the people of Israel, while the people of Israel were going out defiantly. The people of Israel were going out defiantly. Literally, in the Hebrew, what that says is that the people of Israel went out with a high hand. With a high hand. It could be also translated by a high hand, which is actually how I would prefer to translate it. It's not that they go out defiantly proud of what they've done, because what have they done? Nothing. They didn't win a battle. They didn't set themselves free. They were rescued. They were ransomed. They were redeemed. They got nothing to boast about. They have nothing that they can take pride in over what they've done. They're not going out, look, we showed you, Pharaoh. That's not what they're doing. But what they can do is boast in the Lord. Right? And this has always been, and I've pointed this out as we've been walking through it, this is a battle between hands. It's a battle between arms. It's a battle between strength. Is it the hand, the arm, the strength of Pharaoh that rules, or is it the hand, the arm, and the strength of Yahweh that rules? Yahweh has struck Pharaoh over and over again to the point that Pharaoh set them out. But now Pharaoh's like, no, let's go another round. No. They're not going to serve you. They're going to serve me. I'm the power. I'm the authority, Pharaoh says. You can't have them. I'm going to come back and get them. So Pharaoh's coming for another round. So the Egyptians pursued them, all of Pharaoh's horses and chariots and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them and camped at the sea, by that place in front of that other place. And when Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them. And they feared greatly. Can you imagine? So, here you are, all you've known your life, your parents' life, your grandparents' life is slavery. You've been brutalized and victimized. And now, hope against hope, God has shown up. God has broken the power of Pharaoh in Egypt. God has set you free. He's taken you out. And you got this pillar of cloud in the day and a pillar of fire at night, and he's leading you, and you're like, this is going to be awesome. We're going to the promised land. Nothing can stand against us. And then God backs you into a corner, says, sit here and wait. And then you wait, and the next thing you see is the greatest military army on the earth at the time coming towards you to take you out. Expectations. And they're greatly feared. And the people of Israel cried out to Yahweh. They cried out. They said to Moses, this is crazy. They says, is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you've taken us away to die in the wilderness? This is irony. This is humorous irony. What is Egypt? Egypt is the land of light and life, but it's a land that is obsessed with death. When you think of Egypt, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? It's the pyramids. What are the pyramids? They're tombs. Egypt was the land of graves, right? There's like, oh, so there weren't enough graves in Egypt? We've just been spending our time, right, in this land that is obsessed with death and graves. We're not good enough to be buried there, so you got to take us out here. What have you done in bringing us out of Egypt? What a statement. They're not accusing God, they're accusing Moses. Easy target. What have you done? It's all your fault, Moses. Couldn't bury us there, you got to bury us here. What have you done in bringing us out? Not to mention that they were the ones that were crying out to Yahweh for a deliverer. They were the ones that were crying out when their sons were ripped from their arms and thrown into the Nile. They were the ones that were beaten when they couldn't meet their quotas because the straw was taken away from them. They were the ones that had been suffering. They were the ones that had cried out for God to send a deliverer, and he did in Moses. But now, when they're faced with fear, all their expectations of an easy victory go out the window, and they're just angry and afraid. And what have you done in bringing us out of Egypt? What have you done? Is this not what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? This is blasphemy. This is a betrayal of the ultimate order. This whole thing has been about who are they going to serve? Are they going to serve Pharaoh or are they going to serve Yahweh? They're God's covenant people. They're God's people of promise. They belong to God. They're designed to serve God. And so they say, is this not what we said to you in Egypt? Just leave us alone so that we can serve the Egyptians. We'd rather be slaves in Egypt than free in the wilderness. That's what we said to you, Moses, remember? Now, we don't have that recorded anywhere. Maybe they said it, maybe they didn't. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. This is treason. That's a treasonous statement. Because they've been redeemed by God and they've been consecrated unto him as his people. And they say to Moses, we don't want to belong to Yahweh. We don't want to serve Yahweh. We don't want to follow Yahweh. We'd rather be back in Egypt serving Pharaoh. Moses said to the people, fear not. Stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. So here's their job. This is what they have to do in the equation. Fear not and stand. Don't run away. Don't bow down and submit to Pharaoh. Fear not and stand so that you can see what God is going to do for you. For the Egyptians whom you see today, that's all they can see. And isn't that the truth? Like when we're facing an enemy, when we're facing a struggle, a difficulty, a sin, a challenge, we get tunnel vision. It's all we can see. It's that problem. It's all we can see. He says, that enemy, that army that you see today, you'll never see again because Yahweh will fight for you and you have only to be silent. You have only to be silent. I love what the psalmist says about this in Psalm 106. It's a psalm of contrition, a psalm of repentance. The psalmist says, both we and our fathers have sinned. We have committed iniquity. We have done wickedness. Our fathers, when they were in Egypt, did not consider your wondrous works. They did not remember the abundance of your steadfast love, but rebelled by the sea, at the Red Sea. This is a rebellion against Moses and against God. They rebelled. They did not remember what had just happened that week. Some of you are like, well, that's normal, isn't it? It had just happened. But they rebelled. They didn't remember. Yet, he saved them for his name's sake, that he might make known his mighty power. He rebuked the Red Sea, and it became dry. And he led them through the deep as through a desert. He saved them from the hand of the foe and redeemed them from the power of the enemy. And the waters covered their adversaries. Not one of them was left. Then they believed his words. Then they sang his praise. More on that next week. Back to Exodus. So the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry out to me? And you're like, well, and hear Moses crying out. Moses is the representative of the people. Okay, so the people are crying out to God. So God comes and he doesn't talk to all the people right now. He talks to Moses. He says, why are they crying out? He says, tell the people of Israel to go forward. lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground. So the whole problem is that they're backed up against the sea that they cannot pass. And God says, this is not a problem. So you take that staff, yeah, the one that you threw down that became a snake. Yeah, the one that you held over the Nile and it turned into the blood. Yeah, the one that you raised, and you take that staff. And you raise it out over the waters and divide them, that the people of Israel may go through on dry ground. And I will strengthen the heart of the Egyptians so that they shall go in after them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his hosts, his chariots, and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. So then the angel of God, who was moving before the host of Israel, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them, coming between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel. This is where I wish we had some really good CGI or something like this. So, because now we got two theophanies taking place here. So we got the angel of the Lord showing up again. We saw him back in the bush that wasn't consumed. We see the angel of the Lord as this pre-incarnate Christ. And it's the leader of the Lord's army. It's the one that's directing them. So he'd been leading them. Now he goes around and stands behind them. And the pillar and the pillar of cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night, it had been leading them. It goes around behind them, right? And there's some intimations in the Hebrew grammar that the angel maybe strikes a military pose, right? Like in my mind, he's got the ninja swords and so here's the angel and the cloud in between Egypt and Israel. So now Israel's sandwiched between the angel and the cloud, the pillar, and the sea. And it says, and there was the cloud and the darkness, and it lit up the night without one coming near the other all night. So now the cloud's doing two things, right? So the cloud is now providing light upon the Israelites and a darkness upon the Egyptians. So they can't see what's going on, but the Israelites can. And it lights them up throughout the night. And then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. So think about this. And I know you got to erase all the movies that you've ever seen, okay? No, you just do, because and it's such a simple detail, but they all get them wrong. Everyone that I've seen gets it wrong. Maybe there's one that gets it right, but I haven't seen it. So it all, he raises up and right in front of them, the waters begin to divide, right? Except that's not what the text says. So they're going east, right? So the sea is on their east, and he brings an east wind. So the wind is coming from the east. That's why it's called the east wind, okay? And so if it's coming from the east, where is it hitting the water? From the east, which means that it starts on the far side. Think about it. God rarely takes the easy or obvious path, right? So here they are. Moses got the staff up. The wind comes, and they're looking because the pillar of fire is illuminating in front of them, and they start to feel the wind, and it's coming, and it's coming. And this has got to be a strong wind, right? And so, and they look and see from the far side. From the far side, the waters begin to part. From the far side, the dry land begins to come, and they got to wait, and they got to wait, and they got to wait until the land is dry in front. They got to wait that whole time while the waters were divided. And the people of Israel then went into the midst of the sea on dry ground. the waters being a wall to them on their right and on their left. And the Egyptians then pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, all of Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. All right, well, the ground is dry. We can still go faster than them. Let's go. And in the morning watch, Yahweh in the pillar of fire and of cloud peeked out. This is what he looked out, looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into a panic. Oh, I don't know what they saw, but it messed everything up. So they get into this great panic, and then it says, and clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. Like, no, duh. That's all he's been doing. Like, over and over and over again. But how quickly the Egyptians forgot. How quickly their greed came back. He fights for them. And the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. So he had some good shoulder strength, is what I'm thinking. Okay, so he's raised it up, and now they're walking through. I don't think they're through all the way yet. The text doesn't seem to imply that. They're still in the midst of it. They got water on their side. Pharaoh and the chariots have now entered in. God has mucked up the wheels. They're going slow. They're not overtaking, but they're deep into it. And God's like, all right, turn around, Moses, raise the staff the other way, that the water may come upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. I think it's actually important that they're not out on the other side. Like, they're still in the midst of it. Like, they're still in the midst of it. Raise it and let the waters come down. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. When the morning appeared. That's such an interesting little detail. Because who's the chief god in the Egyptian pantheon? It's Ra, the sun god. And when the morning appears, like they go through the night, and Ra's down in the underworld fighting the great beast, and they're waiting for him to come back up, because once he comes back up, then he can shine with his divine light upon the land. He can help and rescue Egyptians. But right when the morning breaks, right when Ra should come to their rescue and victory, the waters collapse upon them. And as the Egyptians fled into it, Yahweh threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen. All of the host of Pharaoh had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on their right and on their left. Simultaneously protecting, rescuing, and redeeming his people, while justly judging Pharaoh and Egypt. Thus the Lord saved Israel. Yahweh saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. And Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. And you think, oh, well, now that they got that out of the way, everything's going to be awesome. If only. If only. There's a lot going on in this story. There's a surface story, and then there's the story under the surface, so to speak. The imagery, the symbolism, the connection to the story that's being told in all of the Torah and all of the scriptures. I've mentioned over the last several weeks how the plagues, the signs, each directly correlate to the 7 days of creation. The plagues, the strikes against Egypt and Pharaoh were acts of decreation, destabilization, deordering. But God has moved upon Egypt, who thought they were the center of Ma'at. They thought they were the place of order. They thought that they had it figured out. And God says, no, you don't have it figured at all. So he comes upon them and he deorders them. They're acts of decreation. And then he sanctifies for himself a people, sets them apart, and leads them out. Much like in Genesis, we have the creation narrative in the Song of Creation in chapter 1, and then we get this secondary creation narrative of Adam and Eve, of God creating for himself a people and placing them within Eden, his land, his temple, with him. So now God is created for himself a people, and he's going to take them to his land. And so this whole narrative of coming through so you got light and darkness. That's Genesis 1. You've got the land being separated from the water. That's Genesis 1. You've got God's people being delivered into a land where they will be with God. That's Genesis chapter 2. This is an act of creation. God is saying that what was broken in the fall after the original creation, God is now moving to bring about this new act of creation that's going to bring redemption and healing to all of creation. He's the God of it all. There's a lot of this narrative that's a polemic against the religious beliefs and theology and practices of Egypt. It's a demonstration of God's superiority over the gods of Egypt. That there is no power that can stand up against God. And that God, unlike what the Egyptians and everybody else in the ancient Near East thought, is not defined or determined or restricted to a geography or a place or an act or an event or a part of nature or a particular people. But Yahweh is God of everyone, everywhere. He is the creator of it all. There's no one like Yahweh. So this story, this is a demonstration, right? That's how it ends. When they saw what Yahweh did, they greatly feared him and believed in him and in Moses. What they're believing in is that there's no one that can stand up against God. That he is the sovereign one. That he is sufficient. That he is their deliverer. And we're going to see next week, they get out to the other side and they have a little party. They sing a little song, do a little dance. And they're beautiful. It's a beautiful text, but it's all a polemic. It's all about God's victory over the gods of Egypt, God's dominance and prominence over any power, whether on the earth or in the heavens. For now, let me just give you a little taste. Psalm 89. It says, let the heavens praise your wonders, O Lord, your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. This is heaven's language. This is divine counsel language. This is the Bene Elohim, the sons of God. These are the imagers of God that are not of the earth but are of the heavens. What we commonly call angels, which is such a misunderstood word of lumping all of the denizens of the spiritual realm under one little category. So God is in the midst, his faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies can be, who in the heavens Who in the heavens, who in the heavenly realm can be compared to Yahweh? Who among the heavenly beings is like Yahweh? Are there heavenly beings? Yes. Are there powers and principalities? Yes. Are there angels and cherubim and seraphim? Are there all of these other spiritual heavenly beings? Is there a divine council? Yes. Are any of them like God? No. He's species unique. There's no one like him. Who can compare to him? Right? A God greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones, and awesome above all who are around him. O Yahweh, God of hosts, who is mighty as you are, O Lord, with your faithfulness all around you. You rule the raging of the sea. When its waves rise, you still them. You crushed Rahab like a carcass. You scattered your enemies with a mighty arm. The heavens are yours. The earth also is yours. The world and all that is in it. You have founded them. The north and the south, you created them. Tabor and Hermon joyously praise your name. You have a mighty arm. Strong is your hand. High your right hand. This writer of Psalm 89 had to have been reflecting on this Exodus narrative. God's powerful demonstration, his incredible superiority over all of the heavenly beings, the divine beings of Egypt, his ability to control the sea and crush his enemies. The final declaration of the high hand, the strength, and the might of God to battle on behalf of his people. So, great, God delivered. God rescued them and destroyed the Egyptians. God brought them out. God showed his superiority over Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt. What do we do with this? What does this mean for our lives? How often God does not lead his people by what they perceive to be the easiest and shortest way. He knows our hearts, that we would falter in times of danger. Oh, how like the Israelites we are. I think, I'll never forget what God's done for me. I'll never doubt. I'll never look back. I'll never turn around. Good luck with that. Oh, how like the Israelites we are. Thus, God will frequently take us by the long road in many things. In that way, he not only protects us from danger and destruction that we don't know anything about. See, the Israelites didn't know about the Philistines. I mean, they didn't know what would happen if they took the easy way. But God knows. He's protecting them. See, we get so frustrated when God tells us no. We get so frustrated when God doesn't give us what we ask for in the way that we expect or in the time frame that we want it. We're so convinced that we know what is best. We're so easily deluded in that the easy way is going to be the best way or the good way or the right way. And we think that our perspective and our perceptions are absolutely trustworthy and that we know what is best for us. That's how we live. That's the assumption, the presuppositions that guide us. We think that we can figure out and lead our lives better than anybody else can. So don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me how to live. But God knows better. God knows best. God knows more. God sees more. He actually understands. We're so convinced that our path is the right path. And when God doesn't give it to us, It's easy to commit treason like the Israelites. I was better off doing my own thing. I'd be better off going my own way. All the while oblivious to the fact that God is actually protecting us from ourselves. And the way that he leads also has a teaching purpose. We see that over and over again in the text today, didn't we? Like, I'm going to do this so that the Egyptians and so that the Israelites know I'm God. So that they know I'm the ultimate power. So that they know I have supremacy and sovereignty over all the earth. I'm going to teach you something in the path and the journey that I'm going to lead you on. There's a purpose in it. They don't know it, they don't see it, but God says this is what it's going to be. He wants to teach us, just like he taught them, to rely on him, to trust his timing, to let go of the delusion that we know what's best. I quote this Proverbs 14:12 all the time. There is a way that seems right unto a man. There's a way that seems right to a woman. There's a way that seems right. It seems so good. It seems so right, but in the end it leads to death. Is that not the story? Eve, oh, it looks good. Oh, that looks good. I'm going to take and eat. The Bene Elohim, oh, look at those daughters of men. They look good. Let's take them. Oh, look at this. I'm going to take this. Oh, look at this. I'm going to take this. Oh, look. There is a way that seems right to our limited vision and understanding. There's a way that seems right. It seems so right. But in the end, it leads to death. We, like the Israelites, need to learn to submit and surrender and trust in the wisdom and leading of God, especially when it doesn't make sense to us. So because just like the angel and the pillar stood between Israel and their enemy Egypt, we have one who stands up for us. Just like Jesus stood between Israel and Pharaoh and the kingdom of slavery, now Jesus stands between us and the accuser, the Satan, and the kingdom of darkness. Just like God led and directed and protected them, God leads and directs and protects us. And just as God fought for them, and their job was to stand, be silent, and watch, our job is to trust in God to do what only he can do on our behalf. I want to close this morning in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. This opening chapter to a really messed up church. Paul writes this. It's a church that's become divided, a church that's become cliquey, a church that's become competitive, a church that's become boastful. I mean, they're really, really messed up. Like, oh, who were you baptized by? Well, I was baptized by this guy. Ooh, it's super fancy, right? Who? Oh, what do you do? Oh, this church has lost its way. They become convinced of their own sufficiency. And Paul writes, he says, the word of the cross, the word of the gospel, it's foolish, it's folly to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the very power of God. Oh, you're you're going to trust in a crucified Savior? That's how God's going to rescue and redeem the world? By sending his Son and delivering him to die on a cross? That's what you're going to put your hope in? See, much like Pharaoh looking out at the Israelites going, they're going to follow that pillar and back themselves up into a corner? That's stupid. They don't know what they're doing. Yahweh doesn't know what he's doing. See, there's a very real way that the message of the cross, the message of the gospel, it seems foolish. It seems absolutely stupid to the mind of the world. We don't need to deny that. We don't need to pretend that that's not true. That's true. But at the very same time, to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. That is where God met us. God met Israel backed up on the sea of, at the end of the world, at the Sea of Reeds, the Red Sea. That's where God showed up and rescued them. And that's where God showed up and rescued us, at the cross. It is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise. The discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Oh, yeah. So you look at what God's doing, you look at the cross, you look at Jesus' sacrifice, his willing sacrifice, and you say, that's ridiculous, that's not... Understand this, just like God strengthened Pharaoh's heart so that he could receive glory by justly bringing judgment upon Pharaoh, God delights in confounding the wisdom of the world. So where is the wise one? Where's the scribe, the lawyer, the thought leader, the innovator? Where's the debater of this age? Bring me your Dr. Phils and Oprahs. Bring me your... Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? Over and over and over and over again? For since in the wisdom of God, the world didn't know God through wisdom. Oh man, I could unpack that for an hour if you'd sit here, but it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. It pleased God. For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to the Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, it is Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. So you consider your calling, brethren. Think about who you are. How many of you were wise according to the world? Not many powerful, not many were of noble birth, but God chose you. What did God do? God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are. Is that not the story of the Exodus? Is that not the story of the church? So that no human being might boast in the presence of God. So that no human being might boast in the presence of God. It is because of him you are in King Jesus. It is because of God. It's because of his plan. It's because of his power. It's because of his intention. It's because of his wisdom. It's because of his strength. It's because he redeemed you. It's because he chose to intervene on our behalf. While we're dead in our sins and trespasses, he chooses to love us. It's because of him you're in Jesus the King, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that, as it is written, Let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. Like the Israelites, we can expect that God will lead us. Like the Israelites, we can expect that God will move us. Like the Israelites, we can expect that it will rarely, if ever, go in the way we expect it to, or the pattern or path that we'd like it to. We can expect, like the Israelites, that God is going to protect us from ourselves. We can expect, like the Israelites, that God will demonstrate His wisdom, His power, even though all the world mocks and rejoices. And like the Israelites, we can stand, fear God, and watch Him be the one who delivers us from our enemies. Because our God is faithful, and our God is above all powers. May we trust Him completely